Well, thank you everyone for joining us this morning for our webinar to hear more about the organic potato production with the SDSU Southeast Research Farm. Today we're going to have a short presentation from Dr. Jackson, who is the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association's Organic Ag Transition Advisor, and then we'll hear from Joslyn about her research. Just to note that this webinar is supported by the USDA TOP program, or Transition to Organic Partnership program. The TOP program in South Dakota is administered by the Organic Crop Improvement Association, or OCIA, under a cooperative agreement to the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association, and it aims to support farmers in transitioning to organic farming. We have an hour and 5 minutes set aside for this webinar. We'll have time for questions at the end, but feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature if you want to send in your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to have them answered. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jackson first.
Thank you, Morgan. So we are excited to talk about a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, which is seed research. And in particular, we'll be talking about organic potato production at the SDSU Southeast Research Farm. As I was speaking this morning with one of the certifiers, we were talking about the need for more varieties of organic seed potatoes nationally and regionally that were pretty limited. So I'm excited to hear what opportunities that might be available, and just to share just a little bit of information about what my role is and what I do. So if anyone on this call or anybody's interested in receiving additional information after this presentation regarding transitioning to organic agriculture, you can reach out to myself and the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association. You can find us on the web. We help with technical assistance, on-farm guidance, education and outreach, and organic system plan assistance. So if you're interested in moving that direction, we have help available to you that's completely free. And I also do on-site visits as well. And just kind of a, whoop, that didn't come out very well, but just kind of a recap on the regulations itself that we're going to be talking about today is regarding the regulations for organic producers to use organic seeds and seedlings and planting stock. However, I just want to mention too that the regulations do have allowances for producers to utilize non-organic seeds and planting stock as long as they are not treated with prohibited substances and they are non-GMO. And I think maybe Joslyn will talk a little bit about that. But for those who are struggling with finding organic seed potatoes, I'm one of those in South Dakota. There are some provisions that can help you, but obviously my goal is to increase organic seed potato availability. And so I'm excited to hear what Joslyn has to say. And also if Dr. Sexton wants to chime in as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Joslyn.
Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so this past growing season, we did a potato variety trial and preliminary comparison of mulched and unmulched full tillage plots. So it was a comparison of mulch versus in-season tillage for weed control and with 5 potato varieties. So you can see there's a pink highlighted spot on the map there, and that was the 2024 potato trial location. And this trial did take place on certified organic land. Here's the plot layout. So you can kind of see to the left, there's a picture with the alfalfa mulch on top. So we had 4 plots that had the mulch on top, and then 4 plots that were treated as like conventional, like hilling and tilling for weed control. Each individual row was 14.25 feet long. The seed potatoes were spaced 14 inches apart, and then the rows were 3 feet apart. And you can see that we utilized 5 different varieties. And on the outside edge, we had a guard row there to allow more equal competition for the other rows that were right next to it. So we chose 5 potato varieties. We did Caribou Russet, Purple Viking, Adirondack Blue, Kennebec, and Satina. The caribou russet is a mid-season potato, and it's a very good potato for like baked potato. And this variety also has very uniform sizes and such, which could be great for like French fry production and getting more US #1 grades. This variety is specifically plant variety protected, and it is USDA certified organic. All of the seeds that we sourced for this trial were from Johnny Selected Seeds. So these variety descriptions that are typed up here are word for word from the seed catalog from them. This variety is also has scab intermediate resistance, and it also has intermediate resistance to verticillium wilt. Then we also selected Purple Viking, which is USDA certified organic. It is an early potato and it's a purple beauty. You can see that deep purple skin with the pink splashes on the outside of it there. And it's known for creating perfect mashed potatoes, but it's also great for other cooking applications. Oh, and then it has intermediate resistance to scab. Then we have the Adirondack Blue, which is kind of a fun one. It's early to mid-season. It has a medium purple skin and flesh, and it has high yields of large oblong tubers with consistent blue-violet flesh. And it does hold the color when cooked, which was really cool to see. And it's high in antioxidants. This variety we could not source as organic. So what we had to do was look for other seed providers that offer this same variety and look for organic options. We looked at 3 or 4 places and they all did not have it offered as organic. So therefore we were able to take that, record that process of looking for that information. And then since it's a non-GMO and it's not treated, we were able to move forward and utilize this in our trial. The Kennebec this one is also certified organic. It's a mid-season, it's an excellent all-purpose potato, and it's widely adapted and it is fast growing, and the plants do best when spaced at 8 to 10 inches to avoid overly large tubers. And it has intermediate resistance to the foliar late blight. Then lastly, we have the Satina. This is a mid-season and it has a yellow skin, yellow flesh, gourmet flavor. According to Johnny Select Seed, this is their favorite potato for the mashed potatoes because it's a very silky, smooth, and buttery flavor profile. And it has high scab resistance, and then it has high tuber late blight resistance. So the first step to kind of look into planting them is to prep the seed potatoes for planting. So there's some key points to touch on. You want to utilize 1.5 to 2.5 ounces for your seed potato pieces. If you get larger than 2.5 ounces, you're not going to see much of an increased benefit with that. So you can see in that bin, I have some potatoes where they're whole and they're not cut. Those were most likely under 1.5 or just over. And then the other ones that were cut up, those were over 2.5 ounces. And when you cut them, you want to make sure that there is an eye on each piece because that is where your potato plant is going to grow. After cutting them, you want to let them sit for 3 to 4 days to allow for healing to occur, or you can plant them directly after cutting. If you allow them to heal, you'll need plenty of oxygen and air movement and humidity in the air and some warmer temperatures. But if you plant them directly after cutting, you need to be sure that you have optimal planting conditions. You should not plant into wet, cold soil, as this will increase the risk of infection occurring. So we prepped the seed bed on April 22nd. This entire seed bed was all tilled, and we were able to go over it with the BCS tiller one time to get that nice, smooth, consistent texture for the potatoes. We also went in and we flagged the trial. There were a lot of different varieties, and each variety within this trial was randomized in the placement. So I had the colors of flags coordinate with the variety, and that helped a lot with going out there and taking notes and such throughout the growing season. So we planted the unmulched full tillage plots on April 24. These were planted at a 4-inch depth, and then again they were spaced at 14 inches apart, and the row was 14.25 feet long. Planting the mulch potatoes, we were able to spread that tape measure on the top and take those seed potatoes and we just placed them on the top of the soil. They were also planted on April 24. So after we planted the mulch potatoes and the unmulched potatoes, we took alfalfa mulch, and we did this twice throughout the growing season. The first time was directly over the seed potatoes on April 24 on just the mulched ones. And the second time we had to take that mulch and place it around the emerging potatoes, and we did that on June 4th. Both times we applied around 6 inches of mulch, and that settled down into like a heavy mat-like coverage. When we were trying to think about the source of this mulch, we did contact our certifier, and they gave us permission to use any source we want. It did not have to be organic. But with that being said, you want to think about your crop rotations and your production system within your organic farm, because if you were to utilize a mulch that was heavily like weed seed infested, then your next year you'd have really high weed pressures. And with an organic production, it's already a struggle with managing your weeds and the weed seed bank. So you want to kind of think about that. And then also the other aspect is you wouldn't want to just grab some ditch hay that's been sprayed that you know of and just throw that out there, because you want to be more conscientious of where you're sourcing your mulch for the things like this. Here is a bird's eye view of the established plots. So in South Dakota, it gets very windy at times, and what we were able to do was utilize some livestock panels to place on top of the mulch to hold that mulch down, so that because the next day after we planted, it was very windy. So we put these panels down, and then we got some rain after that, which was perfect because it kind of settled down into a heavy mat carpet-like structure. And then we were able to remove those panels before any seed potatoes began to emerge. So again, they were all planted on April 24. You can see the unmulched full tillage potato plots emerged more evenly compared to the mulched plot potatoes. And then the unmulched full tillage plots were noticed for emergence around May 13, while the mulched plots were noted for emerging around May 21. So as the time went on with the mulched potatoes emerging, we weren't really sure what was going on or why they weren't emerging evenly. So we began to pull back that mulch, and we actually observed pill bug damage on those seed potatoes. They were munching on the growth as it was occurring. You can see in the right-hand picture that one stem, there's a lot of lack of foliage there. So it was really restricting the amount of growth that the seed potato could do. This was attributed to very, very high moisture amounts that we got in the early part of the growing season. We're thinking this shouldn't be a regular occurrence, as it was a very immense amount of moisture, but the pill bugs love that dark, damp, decaying location, and with having those seed potatoes placed on the top of the surface, that was just a prime place for them to go. This is just kind of a cool picture of the biological diversity that we noticed in the mulch plots when we were harvesting. You can see the earthworm castings there, the pill bugs, and you can see the macro and micropores and the roots kind of growing through there. So I just thought that was a really cool picture. So throughout the growing season, we did observe some pests. We seen the Colorado potato beetles and the ash gray blister beetles. We did notice that in the mulch plots, we observed heavier pest pressures compared to the unmulched full tillage plots, which was very interesting. We also did notice some early blight. You can see in the left-hand picture at the bottom damage of the leaf there's like a very faint circle, it's like a core. And so that is a indicator that it is early blight. Whereas you look at the right-hand picture, and that's more physiological damage. We also experienced the possibility of verticillium wilt. We didn't send off any leaf samples or anything to get it like officially identified, but we did have a few plants where they were randomly kind of dying back like this within the trial. So throughout the growing season, we had some different management decisions that occurred. We had some spray applications. So with those pill bugs, we decided to pull back each and every location of where the seed potato was, and we applied an Entrust SC spinosad, and we did that on June 6th. For these spray applications, we did have to check with our certifier to get permission to use these. A lot of products are out there on the market that say OMRI approved, but certifiers do require you to check in with them and get it approved, because sometimes there's little ingredients in there that they might not approve, or things may have changed. So it is very good to go ahead, check with your certifier, and get it on your approved product list before moving forward with it. We also did a crop canopy spray for the ash gray blisters and the Colorado potato beetles. We did that on August 16, and we only had to do that spray application once because the populations were very high, and so we just hit them really well and it knocked them back, and it kind of, the way the growing season happened, it did kind of take care of it. We also did 3 applications of Coside 3000-0. That is a copper fungicide. It is important to note that this is for blight prevention. It does not kill what is out there. That copper goes on the leaves that are not affected, and it just protects those leaves from any possible other blight infestations into the leaves. We also did a fertilizer application, which I'll talk more about on the next slide with some pictures. We did that on July 23. That was to only the unmulched plots because we noticed some leaf color differences and vigor growth differences. So we utilized 50 pounds of nitrogen on the tillage plots, and we did that through country companion alfalfa pellets. And again, we did have to check with our certifier before using that. And what they had to do was go ahead and contact the company that created those alfalfa pellets and figure out what ingredients were in it. And then once they looked into that, they were able to give us the go-ahead to utilize that. We also had to utilize a yard sprinkler placed on a sawhorse for overhead irrigation. The first event that we did that on was July 24, and that was initially to get those alfalfa pellets to kind of loosen up and break down so that that nitrogen could become more available to those potato plants. We then also applied water on July 26 and August 5th. Throughout those water applications, it was anywhere from a half inch to an inch of water that was applied. And this was because about halfway through the growing season, we started to have drought-like conditions. And when that happens, if the potato doesn't have enough water available, it'll slow down the bulking that's happening, and it will really has the risk of putting a hindrance on your yield. So here's a really cool picture of how the mulch versus the unmulched plots were doing with the nitrogen availability. The front end of the picture is the mulched plots, and then there's 2 reps behind it that are unmulched, and then there's a rep right at the back end that's mulched. On the very outside row, if you remember at the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned that those rows are all the same variety. They're Satina. You can see that the same variety all along the row is maturing quicker in the no-till or in the unmulched plots compared to the front end of the mulched plots. So that is why we did go ahead and put some alfalfa pellets out there to give them a nitrogen source. So our harvest events occurred on August 14 for the Adirondack Blue, August 28 for Purple Viking, September 3 for Kennebec, September 3 for Caribou Russet, and October 15 for Satina. The middle 10 plants were harvested, so it was 11.92 feet. And it's important to note that the mulched and unmulched full tillage plots were harvested at the same time for each variety. There was some maturity differences, but it came down to making a judgment call of when it looked like they were both kind of ready to harvest at the same time to get that consistent data to compare against each other. When we were grading them, we used the US number 1, which was greater than 1.875 inches, and then anything smaller than that was put into the small category. The culls consisted of any diseased potatoes, or if there was greater than 10% damage or greater than 60% discolored skin. It is important to note that when I'm discussing the yield results later, all of those small potatoes were placed into the cull category. So there is a published report on this in the Southeast Research Farm annual report. So you can take a look at that data if you are interested in those smaller potatoes, because I know a lot of producers are interested in those more smaller potatoes and kind of marketing them separately than the US #1 sizes. This was a really interesting photo to demonstrate the mulched versus the unmulched full tillage plant maturity. So this was the Satina variety again. You can see again at the front end, those mulched potatoes are still growing strong. They're bulking up, they're happy. But then behind them, those 2 reps of the unmulched tilled plots, those are ready to go, ready to be harvested. So it was very interesting how the Satina, they really did hold out until the end. Like we were getting a few frosts kind of starting to hit them before we harvested. So some Adirondack Blue observations, they were the first variety to mature. You can see in the far left-hand picture, there's that dead row right there, and that is where those potatoes died back and they matured and they were ready for harvest compared to the rest of the other potato varieties. We did notice that the mulched tubers, they spread out past the 3-foot row spacing, and they were actually found in the row over during harvest. And then, so it was kind of interesting because you would just pull back the mulch and they were just very, very spread out. So then the purple Viking observations, compared to the Adirondack Blue, they grew very grouped together and they did not spread over the soil surface. However, there were some soil deformities of the tubers that were found under the mulch at harvest due to sunlight exposure. So in the future, we probably should have put a third application of that mulch down to help prevent that sunlight peeking through down to the seed potatoes. The Kennebec observations, the unmulched full tillage plots tended to have some green tubers. So you may want to consider a second hilling event or just really get that hill built up for them because they were very sensitive to the sunlight through that soil a bit compared to the other potato varieties. The mulch tubers demonstrated deformities due to sunlight exposure, and they also had some green potatoes under the mulch as well. When I was grading the potatoes, I did find some bacterial soft rot present in the mulch plots, but it was not widespread. The caribou russet, they demonstrated a very consistent tuber size. So at the beginning, when I was kind of describing them, I mentioned that they would be a very good potato for the French fries production. But if you're in the market for more of a small potato that can be used for roasting and stuff like that, you might not want to consider the caribou russet. It was interesting because the tuber production went quite far beneath the soil in the mulch plots. We actually had to get the pitchfork out for these and pop them up. And then a second set of tubers were also present above the mulched level, so they may need a entire area of mulch applied around the stem of the plant. In the bottom 2 pictures there, you can see in the right-hand picture that there is internal brown spot. That was noted as being present in the unmulched full tillage plots, but not in the mulched plots. And that is possibly due to calcium, because calcium is an immobile nutrient and it flows with the transpiration that's occurring within the plant. And so what we kind of hypothesized was the hilled potato plots versus the mulch plots. The hilled potato plots are covered in that soil, that they don't have much exposure to the air, whereas the mulch plots, they have a little bit of more airflow going on around that tuber as the top of them is a little bit exposed above ground. And so when that drought stress or the heat stress is occurring, the plant is slowing down its transpiration, but those tubers in the unmulched plots are allowing a little bit more transpiration to kind of occur, which might be allowing that calcium to still kind of move into that tuber and not become as much of a limiting factor compared to the tilled plots. Then we have the Satina observation. This variety was the last variety to mature for harvest. It was interesting because there was a lot of mouse damage and it was very prominent on these tubers, which we were thinking it might have been because of the late maturity, because we also had those frosts kind of hitting, so the mice might have been going even more so into the plots because they also were digging into the hilled plots and munching on those potatoes. And it wasn't just one little bite and move on. You can see in the right-hand picture, there's a good chunk of the potato that the mice have ate off there. We also noticed that the tubers did sprout within 24 hours after harvest, so a sprout inhibitor would be advised for storage. So again, when discussing the yield results, keep in mind that these results are for the grade of US number 1. The small grade got plopped into the category of the culls. So the caribou russet was indifferent between if it preferred the mulched versus the unmulched, but the full tillage plots, the Kennebec and the Purple Viking, really did prefer that. And then the no-till mulch plots, the Satina and the Adirondack Blue, preferred that for their production. So we also looked at the storage ability for each variety. So after each harvest event, between 5 and 8 pounds of each potato were kept for storage. All the varieties stored well into the middle of January at room temperature. However, they did begin to sprout in storage, so because the sprout inhibitor was not applied. We also looked at the culinary value because we had all these different potatoes and they have different flavor and texture profiles. In the picture, the very top middle one, that is the Adirondack Blue. Then the one down clockwise from it is the Satina. Then the next one is Kennebec, then it's Purple Viking, and then Caribou Russet. So these potatoes were roasted in some olive oil with a little bit of salt, and then 6 people taste tested and rated them. It is important to keep in mind that everyone will have texture and flavor preferences, which is why, as a producer, it's great to have a variety of potatoes available for market. Potato varieties have different flavor and textures, which determines the way it is best prepared. You can see in that picture that one of them is the Kennebec is a lot more waxy compared to the others, along with the Adirondack Blue. That one was also waxy and moist. Whereas the Satina and the Caribou Russet and Purple Viking, you can see that kind of nice crisping up of the skin from the roasting that occurred. The Adirondack Blue was preferred for appearance, but it was not enjoyed as much for flavor or texture. And then the Caribou Russet and Purple Viking were the flavor and texture favorites, along with also being more visually appealing compared to the Satina and Kennebec. But it is important to keep in mind that there was only 6 people that did this taste test, and everyone does have different texture and flavor preferences. So some future research ideas to come for doing this trial again. We would probably take that seed potato in the mulch plots and bury it a 1/2 inch to 1 inch deep, just to allow for a more consistent growing environment to hopefully impact the rate of emergence that occurs for them. And then also to possibly reduce the risk of those pests and pill bugs coming in there and munching on that new growth in a really wet spring growing conditions. That's all I have. So this is my contact information. If any of you do have questions for Dr. Peter Sexton, who worked closely on the trial with me, you could email me as well, and I could get the questions forwarded to him. There's a QR code, and then that is the link for the report of the potato research that we did. So that's out there and published, so you guys can take a look at that and look into a few more things that I couldn't quite go into depth about over this presentation. So I don't know if there's any questions now, or can answer those if there are.
It's none in the chat yet. I know that Peter joined us to hopefully share a little bit more about the research farm in general with listeners. So I don't know if he's there and maybe can talk to that a little bit. And I know that I think you already have a date for your field day for 2025. Am I right? So maybe we can share that too.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Morgan. Just in general at the research farm, we've got about 12 acres that are certified organic. We've got about 520 acres total crop production. We're trying to get more into the horticultural side of things. So we're just getting started moving in that direction. And so this is kind of our first foray into working with potatoes. But we're kind of that's something we could do more of in the future if people were interested. So I'm kind of curious what you and Angela think about working with potatoes versus other crops. Well,
And two, we did send that survey out with Joslyn, so if you're still open to responses on that, or maybe it's too late, I could send that out with the recording of this webinar. So definitely let me know if you're still open to hearing from producers on that.
sure, we'd be if people have, ideas on potato research they'd like done, or if there's another crop they'd like worked on, that we'd be game to do our best in that, move in that direction. So and just in general, we've got probably about 2 acres were set up for drip irrigation. Christine Lang is doing some work with cabbages and sweet corn. And then that's most of what's going on there. Our oat breeder is hoping to do some variety development work for organic systems. And so that work will hopefully start probably not this year, but next year if she can get grant support for it. And our farm is producer owned. It's owned by a nonprofit association of farmers. And most of all those guys are conventional, but they like the idea of working with organic and trying to help smaller people, farmers get started. So they've been very supportive of doing organic work. So I don't know, Morgan, does that answer your question? Is that what you were thinking about, or?
Yeah, can you share a little bit? So if a producer comes to you or Jocelyn with an idea and you do that, is it just kind of like you communicate about their idea and then you share the research with them later, or is there any opportunity for them to maybe be more involved, or what does that look like?
Well, right now we've got, like everyone, we've got limited resources. But so I don't want to overstate what we can do, but we're definitely interested in ideas, and if we can make it work, we'll try to. And it would just be kind of sharing ideas at this point, or a problem that you feel needs to be worked on. I think one thing we were thinking about, of course, is this use of mulch. Another one would be use of like different cover crops raised between the rows to try and reduce pest pressures. And then with different things we could do for weed control with mulches or cover crops also. So I know there's a whole host of things that could be done. So I'm just trying to keep an open door there for people that have ideas they want to make suggestions on.
Thanks for clarifying. I think I just wanted to make it clear if anyone's watching and then has an idea what that might look like. I see that Angela keeps unmuting herself, but I keep jumping in, so I'm gonna let her talk.
Okay.
Yeah, because I've been working, Pete, with the NRCS office on a lot of these conservation practices, because the organic transition initiative, you can get assistance to help you during those transition years. Are you doing any research on that, on like the experience of transitioning to organic systems?
Not really, not at this point. And so we've done a little bit of work with rye and corn and soybeans in the past with flaming. But we haven't done much with transitioning. So basically what we've done is we put ground into alfalfa and then don't use any chemicals on it for 3 years, and then we come out of that and certify it as organic. That's what we've done for the land. I'm not sure income wise there might be better ways to do that, but as far as management for the, that's simple and easy way to approach it. So that's what we've done.
Have you ever done collaborative projects with farmers, organic farmers? Like, I know like Iowa State University had their Iowa Learning Farm program through Iowa State University Extension. Does SDSU do anything like that? Like working with organic producers with on-farm research?
Yeah, Christine Lang does. Christine Lang does more of that kind of stuff. So she's got trials. So we had a trial here this last year, and it's going on now with sweet corn production, and that's also being done with on producer farms. But it's really, that's more Christine Lang's.
Okay.
She's coordinating that more than I am.
Okay. Joslyn, can you talk maybe a little bit more about the nutrient management plan that you put together for the potatoes? How did you go about with that decision-making process?
So we originally put that alfalfa mulch out there, and as the growing season went on, we started to notice some differences that were occurring. Peter and I were talking earlier, and we were saying what we really should have done was probably taken that bale, weighed it, and then applied it, and then taken that nutrition profile and then looked at it compared to the alfalfa mulch pellets and kind of equalized that out there so there's not as much of like a treatment difference. So that is something that in the future years of this research that will probably be done that way instead. So, but I know with the previous organic inspections and stuff, they do like to see those soil sample results because they really want to monitor those micronutrients in there. You don't want to get them to be to levels that will cause restriction of other nutrients moving throughout that. So, and I know when working with Dr. Lang, we use OMRI approved fertilizers, and we put that through like the dosatron through drip systems and such, but it is important to keep like monitoring that and communicating with your certifier on those levels.
So did you do soil testing, like any baseline soil testing?
We did not before or during. That could be something that would be interesting to look into.
No, we have some of those tests from previous years, Angela, and that field was manured. We have beef feedlot manure and swine manure here on our farm. So that's basically what we were using to get the nutrients up in that particular field.
I'm really interested in your research because we are also experimenting with alfalfa mulch on our farm and our vegetables and with strawberries. We're not seeing a good response with the strawberries, but we're interested to keep exploring this idea of the alfalfa mulch because with some vegetables and fruits, we see a clear difference and with using alfalfa mulch versus like straw or wood chips. But some other plants don't respond well to alfalfa mulch. Do you have some thoughts as to why that is?
I'm not sure, Angela. I think part of it is there's variety differences. If we look at this in your annual report, I mean, our annual report, Joslyn had the QR code for it. It's a 2024 Southeast Research Farm annual report if you want to search for it. And we had two lines that the Satina and the Adirondack Blue performed better with the mulch, and the Kennebec and the Purple Viking performed poorer with the mulch. So there was variety differences just within potatoes. They didn't all respond the same way. So there's some genetic differences going on there. I suspect part of it too might be if you're the crop that you're raising shares any diseases with the alfalfa, then you might have some pathogens that come in with the mulch. So something that's not related closely, I would expect the alfalfa would just help it. Something that's kind of in the legume category, something that's related to alfalfa you might have some disease moving with the mulch. That's just be my first thought there.
We tried it with watermelons and did not work.
Okay.
We really interested, the variety of watermelons, I can't remember which ones we planted, but it almost killed them.
Okay.
So I know it's really interesting. I'd like to do some more research on,
How thick was the mulch, Angela?
3 inches, I think.
Okay.
I
All
think
right.
we put it down like 2 to 3 inches, and we started from transplant. We did seedlings, transplants, and just did not work. But the butternut squash went bananas, but the watermelon did not. So we tried this last year with all of our vegetables. We used alfalfa mulch, and the watermelon really died back, but the butternut squash just took off. It
Okay.
worked really well.
Okay.
Bumper crop with butternut squash.
The other thing I would think about there, Angela, too, is if you have things that have root rot problems, then if you have a heavy mulch, it might stay wetter on there, especially if you have wet conditions. And
Mm.
so you might have more root rots with a heavy mulch,
Mm.
depending on the year, and the drainage.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think watermelons like heavy soil. I don't think they like
Yeah.
having wet feet.
Yeah.
So that would be my guess there, but I'm just guessing.
So the potato field, Joslyn, the area where these potatoes were planted, that wasn't drip irrigation, right? You just watered it by hand.
We watered it with like a yard sprinkler on a sawhorse. So yeah, it was not drip irrigation.
Do you use municipal water out there, or is it well water?
It's municipal.
Do you have you guys seen any issues with using municipal water? We do a siphon off process where we put it in a big tank and let the chlorine bleach evaporate off before we put it on our plants, because we have a lot of problem with the municipal water with our vegetables.
I know as the growing season goes on, you will see a like salty crust on the top of the soil as time goes on. So that is something I have thought about in the past too. And you kind of wonder how it might interact with like the dosatron fertilizer events and stuff like that. But that'd be something to kind of look further into.
Yeah, we put on the ends of our pumps, we have these filters that filter all the salts and the chlorine out, because we were having so many problems with wilt, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. Our garden was just not thriving. And we started putting all these filters on our pump handles, and then Glenn started letting it put into a big open cattle tank and letting it sit there and let it all evaporate off. I think he let it sit for like 48 hours, and then he'd pump it out of that tank, using just like a sump pump out through the system, our drip tape system, and we had less wilt problems. Our cucumbers did better. So maybe has anybody done any research in that area, like the impact of municipal water on vegetable production? Or is that something you guys might be interested in?
Boy, we don't have a wells water here, Angela, so we're just
Okay.
kind of on the rural water system. We do, like if we're doing something with a microbial application, then we have to get some water. We can't use municipal or
Right.
the rural water system if we're applying microbials. And again, I would say, I hadn't thought about it too much, but you've kind of got your microbial community there, and probably using something with chlorine in it is going to ding the bacteria more than the fungi, so it might knock something out of balance there.
We've found a real problem in our strawberries. I
Okay.
know it's kind of off topic, but I think these ground vining crops seem to me to be sensitive to chlorine. Like, especially we found in our strawberries. But
Okay.
I was just curious if you guys filtered the water at all before you put it on.
No, I'm gonna, well, think about it now. So that's a good point, Angela.
Mm-hmm.
But no, we haven't been filtering it.
Well, plants respond differently to high levels of salt and chlorine, and maybe repeat. Did you have plans to repeat the research at all, Joslyn, after you've kind of walk through what worked and didn't work, maybe some things you would do different. Is there thoughts about continuing this maybe with sweet potatoes or a different type of tuber plant?
We have been, that's actually what we've been discussing. Peter just said we better look into ordering seed potatoes here. So I think we will be moving forward with it. And these are like different ideas to kind of think about with how to design the next aspect of the trial to kind of repeat it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll definitely try to read up on the chlorine in the water, Angela. I haven't read up on it much, but it makes sense that it would affect some microbes more than others. So now that's going to mess with your community structure.
Yeah.
And you might be more likely to have disease issue.
Yeah.
So I can see that, but I can't address it that I've done research on it specifically.
Do we have any questions, Morgan?
No.
Who's your certifier, Joslyn?
Minnesota Crop Improvement Association.
And how are they to work with in terms of, like you said, you talked a lot in your presentation how you had to go back and get approval, you know, before you use these substances. How long does that normally take?
There were a few times where like someone wasn't in the office and it would almost take like a week or two to hear back from them. But usually like there's been times where like we have a last minute thing come up and we can just quick give them a phone call and talk about it with them. And then I usually follow up with an email so that we get the conversation and the approval in writing as well as put on our approved list. But they have been really good to work with. They're very informative, and even if they say yes or no, they still kind of explain the why behind it, which I find really helpful too, because then it helps you kind of structure and form your thinking for other decisions you're making down the road.
When do you typically have your inspection?
In the summer months. I think this previous one was in, I think it was end of July, but that one was late, so it's usually in June, I think. So our application for this year is due on April 1st. I was actually just working on that yesterday. So it's a lot of things to work through and consider and to stay updated on with. So, and that's another aspect to speak to as well, is this farm has organic acres and it has conventional acres. So you really have to like communicate well with each other and pay attention to like the weather and the wind patterns if you're going to be spraying, and have those good buffer zones, and just really be considerate. Like if you're going to use a piece of machinery on a piece of land that's not certified organic and you're going to go into like a transition acre or an organic certified acre, make sure you clean off that machinery, have some form of record of that, and just like really be diligent in your records and note taking with that as well.
Do either of you have the date handy for the 2025 field day? I was just thinking about having that in here and also sharing it with the recording. Otherwise, if you can email it to me, I'll include it.
Hey, Peter, we can't hear you. I'm not sure. I think it's July 8th.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Can you
Now
hear
we
me
can
now?
hear you.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
now
Sorry
we
about
can
that.
hear you.
Yeah, it's July 8th, and we're the extension folks are going to do something a little different, try to have kind of make it more of a family event in the evening. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it works well. Can bring the whole family kind of deal. And we usually start at 1:30, but that would be more the agronomy conventional stuff, and then the family part of it would be more in the evening, so after 5 o'clock.
And there will be one tour that's designated to horticulture stuff. So I believe Dr. Lang has some lettuce in the high tunnel, and then we'll probably have the potatoes. And then there's also going to be the sweet corn out in another field that we'll drive out to and talk about as well.
Yeah, so those tours would be running from 1:30 through the day.